Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Write an Adventure, our ongoing live stream where we are creating a completely custom campaign in real time so you can see all the steps and ideas and thought processes and considerations that go into creating a campaign using my system. I'm RJ Kerr, I'm your host as usual, and today we are going to be working on some of the world building surrounding our sea shanty siren encounter. If you have not watched our previous live streams, or if you have not caught up on the videos, we are, let me get you caught up here. We are building, as I said, a custom campaign with a completely unique domain of dread. And we've done a lot of work so far. We have figured out that we're going to be using the story circle structure to kind of give us a guideline in very rough terms about all the pieces and parts of this campaign so we can tell a cohesive story. We have figured out how our characters enter this domain of dread through a portal that opens up on the Blood Moon. We have figured out what kinds of personal motivations would draw our characters into this domain of dread. We have figured out where they're going to land in a shanty town called Darkport, which sits on the edge of an inland sea. And we figured out that this inland sea is a big part of this domain of dread, that it was once the basin of a thriving metropolis that's now fallen into ruin and has become flooded. We've also figured out that the dread lord of this domain is an elemental entity that we're calling Ovander. And we're still figuring out exactly how Ovander fits into this world and this adventure. We've also figured out the very first adventure that our characters are going to be engaged in, where they are briefly kidnapped and enslaved, and therefore have to escape their captors. And in doing so, learn about the existence of a long lost artifact that gives the wielders some power over this domain of dread, and come to understand that this artifact is their best chance for escaping with their lives. And so now we're working on a part of the campaign where the characters get proactive, where they have clues to follow and they can explore the world and really kind of go wherever the hell they want. And so we're using a node structure style for that, where at each node we've littered a series of clues the characters may find, may not find. They may find some, they may find all of them, they may find none of them. But they have the opportunity to find these clues and follow them to the next node, or the investigative scene, as I prefer to call it. Um, and so, by following this kind of trail of breadcrumbs, they can eventually discover through multiple routes the location of this artifact. And by using this method, we give our characters a ton, or we should say, we give our players a ton of autonomy while still giving ourselves as DMs some structure to work with so that we're not creating everything completely from scratch as we play this game. So it's not entirely improv. That being said, we've created a number of adventures that kind of fill in this node structure style. We've created one that's a 5-room dungeon. We've created one that's a 5-scene dungeon and is built around the heist style methodology. And now we're working on one that is a sort of complex social encounter. And so it's not, entirely what we might call a full-fledged adventure by itself, but it is more than just a series of charisma checks that will resolve this overall problem. And so the idea here is that the players have gone to see this siren who's a predatory creature by nature, and she lures beings to her atoll and feasts on them. But recently, she's had her voice stolen, and therefore wants the characters to uh, acquire a voice for her. And she has a few special requirements. She's come up with a short list of NPCs that she will accept the voice from. The twist being that the characters have to convince this NPC to give up their voice willingly. And so we have done a couple things here to really kind of maximize the interactions here. This sort of encounter relies heavily on the NPC interactions and less about the mechanics of the game here. Meaning this sort of style works well for a lot of different TTRPG systems in which we define the motivations and the values of a particular NPC. Specifically, we talk about their objective, which is what they want right now. We talk about their ambition, which is what they want overall, and then we talk about their core values. And we try to give them at least two core values that could possibly conflict, so that the players can kind of twist and distort that and use that as a way to create interesting decisions and interesting choices in this NPC. We also give them a secret in which the characters can discover the secret and use it as leverage against this particular NPC. So we spent some time building out the siren, and then we built out the three different NPCs from which she wants to steal her voice. And in doing this, because these are going to be really in depth social interactions, we want to give our DM in this case a lot of tools to kind of guide them through this very ambiguous sort of situation where we're having a lot of interpersonal interaction. We gave them the sort of core ambition, objective, values, and secrets, but we also gave them a dilemma, a reason why they might want to give up their voice and a reason why they might not want to give up their voice. And we laid out some clues to help the characters kind of figure out some of the secrets and be able to leverage that. We did that for our bard character, our bard NPC, our priest NPC, and then our widow NPC. And now to continue this, keeping it from being just sort of a very bland and sterile set of charisma checks, whether those be charisma or, whether those be perception or deception. Wow, persuasion, deception, or intimidation. We've added some complications to success here. So the characters convince this NPC to give up their voice, and now they've got to leave with this contract and deliver this voice to the siren. But we don't want it to be that straightforward. We want there to be a few more hurdles they have to overcome. And so we've created some various encounters that apply to each of these NPCs, therefore complicating success, something that the characters need to overcome, the PCs need to overcome to really kind of return to this siren as they go. And we spent last time really fleshing this out. We've done a good job of that, I think. We've got plenty here to play with. And so what I want to do, other than delete these notes here, is head back up to our arrival and location bit here, where we're kind of setting the scene, right? We kind of have the meat of what happens in this adventure, and that means there's plenty to run with, right? You could run this adventure with just the information we have here. You don't need to build more out. You don't need to create maps. You could run this theater of the mind in its truly sort of purest state. But now we're going to work on, since we have the time, kind of the world building that goes into this. What is this atoll like? What do the characters encounter when they arrive here initially? And we're gonna put some detail into this. We're gonna give ourselves some tools as a DM to work with here. So that being said, I want to remind everybody that this is an interactive stream, and so please feel free to toss in your ideas, suggestions, thoughts, questions, and other comments that you might want to discuss here in the stream, in the chats, or in the chat rather, and we'll talk about that. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into this. So we have this arrival situation, right, where the characters are sort of exploring this world. They come out to this atoll. What is that experience like for them? What is the kind of world building stuff that we can put into this? Because we want to set a scene. We want to create a unique situation in this domain of dread. That makes it separate from all of the other sorts of towns and encounters and what have you that exist in this world. We want it to feel very distinct. And so we want to talk about sort of the experience of arrival. We also want to talk about The location. What do they experience when they get here? What do they find? Because it's probably not just some beautiful siren sitting on a rock, just sort of, troubled by the fact that she doesn't have her voice anymore. There's probably something that's more complicated than that. But we don't necessarily need to create a number of encounters or traps or that sort of deal with this. We can really just kind of come up with descriptions and sort of paint a scene for our player characters. Um, all right. With that being said, looks like we had a few. Oh, looks like we have some activity in the chat here. We've got some hellos. So, hello, Mr. Max. Hello, Ben Elder. Hello, Fantasy Animal Vegan. Good to see you all here. Some of our regulars. And let's go ahead and dive into this. So, what I'm going to put out to the chat here, what I'm going to put out to the group is if we have sort of this atoll and we have this siren who's a part of it, what would the characters encounter when they get here? Now, atolls are traditionally in sort of an IRL. They are islands created by coral growth. Um, so they they're kind of rising up out of the sea here, and they tend to have very calcium carbonate sort of beaches here, which creates kind of white sands and it creates a lot of powder and that sort of deal. But they tend to be very low to the water line, right? So, um, not a lot of mountains, not a lot of hills, that kind of stuff. And so, we have thought of this as an atoll. Doesn't mean we have to stick with that, but it kind of informs perhaps what we're looking for here. So I would toss out to the group, what do the characters encounter when they beach on this world? Now, we've talked about there being a beach ship. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for this so we can kind of get on board with that. We've talked about there being some sort of beach ship, some sort of wreck that maybe the siren lives in. But it could be a number of other structures. There's all sorts of things that we could build out of an atoll. Let's see here. We got a few comments in the chat here. Mr. Mike says, I actually get to fully pay attention to this stream since I'm not at work today. That's wonderful. Glad that you don't have to, pretend that you're working while you listen to the stream, Mr. Max. Good to have you here. Ben Elder says, maybe the corpse/skeleton on the beach of a leviathan or a whale. That's an interesting structure here. Because we have a lot of opportunity to kind of set the scene in this situation. And I think that's an undervalued moment in a lot of D&D campaigns, in that we tend to focus on encounters, we tend to focus on particular interactions, situations, but setting the stage, setting the mood is incredibly important. And so maybe we do have something along the lines of a skeleton of a leviathan or a whale, which frankly in this sort of world could be the same thing. For many centuries, whales were considered sort of the leviathan, with squid being the kraken, and these were all sort of sea monsters that people didn't understand. I mean, hence Moby Dick, right? Where we have sort of the white whale that is attacking ships. And frankly, we in the modern era have plenty of examples of whales attacking vessels to protect themselves or protect their pods. And so it could be interesting to have a leviathan here, in many cases, a fantasy kind of whale that could be washed up on the shore, and maybe the siren is living in the skeleton of it. Sharks, for example, all have a skeleton of cartilage, and so they don't really kind of preserve well. But but whales have a skeleton of bone, and so they do preserve well. It could be something that that a creature is living within. So that's not a bad idea. We could run with that. Um, we also might want to talk about some of the vegetation. Mangroves tend to thrive in atolls, in that situation where we have um, sort of these thick mangrove forests, which are all the sort of gnarled roots. We have sorts of iguanas and reptiles that kind of fall out of that sort of thing, but they kind of add to the local flora and fauna in these situations where they prevent some of the erosion and kind of maintain the structural integrity of some of these atolls. There might be something to work in here. We might consider that. But this is a fantasy world, so we can kind of mix and match and do what we want with that. Let's see here. Mr. Max says a nice black sand shore. Could there be floating sea life near the shore itself, or a large buildup of algae to show the environment is twisted to the presence of the siren? That's an interesting world building thought here, because we have sort of this creature that really kind of has made this her lair, right? And in doing so, she's, in a fantasy sense, she's probably twisted some of the reality to kind of meet her needs here. And so we might want to consider what has changed, what's warped about this world, especially since she's made this her lair. So that's a really good point. And frankly, a black sand beach is just kind of a cool detail. It's not something that a lot of us encounter in the world naturally, and so it adds a touch to this place that feels really good. Especially if we were to say, for instance, that kind of the coral growth that's created this atoll is black coral, as opposed to the bleached bone kind of white of this coral. It can really maybe make it distinct, and really kind of stand out in this world. Fantasy Animal Vegan says, "What is the siren is a local shopkeeper? I assume that's what if the siren is a local shopkeeper. Maybe they run a mermaid statue gift shop or a croissant shop that braids the bread into sea creatures. Their name and face are on the shop sign, but that doesn't run the day to day." Okay, yeah, I mean it's potential. That's a potential option. I think it. I think it runs kind of counter to the idea that the siren is a predatory creature and that she's luring people to the atoll to feast on them. Um, it's a little more Studio Ghibli, right? Which is not necessarily a bad thing. There's certainly D&D modules that lean into that, and you can certainly create um, sorts of situations that really lend themselves to that. There's a lot of benefit to those sorts of encounters where one of the things that I should say that the Studio Ghibli does really well is they create tension and then they give you sort of these lows where you can kind of appreciate that, where you can kind of reconcile that tension and become accustomed and sort of heal from it. And then they ratchet up the tension again, which makes you feel it. They do a really good job with levels. And so that's certainly something that you could lean into in this world to create some of the levels that we're looking for in this domain of dread. So definitely something you could work with on there. Mr. Max says bleached coral that looks like bone with scattered remnants of skeletons throughout the reef. 100% you can do that kind of thing. And maybe we want to lean into that. There's a Ghost of Salt Marsh kind of deal where the characters explore an island and there's skeletons that kind of come up out of the sand and that sort of deal with the undead. And so we can kind of lean into that. and make there be some sort of undead that exist in this particular atoll, or suggest that there's undead and kind of creep out our characters. Um, and so, we could certainly lean into that. That being said, we're kind of creating, like I said, a complex social encounter where the characters are more leaning into kind of the dynamic of discussion, kind of the nebulous area of trying to convince an NPC to adopt their point of view, um, as opposed to kind of leaning into the mechanics that we rely on with a lot of adventures here. So this is a structure you can use a lot of TTRPG systems. Um, and so, maybe want to put some undead in here. I'll be honest, I'm a little reticent to do that, because I tend to put a lot of undead in things. That tends to be my de facto sort of decision here, is that we're going to toss some undead in here and we're going to add the complication in. And I think we want to do something a little different here. Fantasy Animal Vegan says, I like the creepier options better. Yeah, creepier is kind of what we're going for in this Domain of Dread. That's kind of what we're building out. Doesn't mean you can run it as something else. I think I've mentioned on this channel before, I've got a buddy who's running Curse of Strahd. It's kind of a Tucker and Dale versus evil sort of campaign. And that's incredibly interesting, to the point where, like, I contact his players every week to find out what the hell happened to their campaign, because that's such a cool way to kind of run this. And you can certainly do that with this sort of adventure, but we're creating something that's a little bit darker here. We're creating something that's a little bit more sinister. So, uh, so we want to stick to that vein for the time being. Ben Elder says, Miss Swirl and obscure as the party approaches. The rush of the waves lulled gently, and a gentle hum echoes over the sand. It pulls at you with a sense of frustration and lost. Coral, both living and dead. Ooh. Ooh, I like that. This sort of combination of vitality and death kind of merging in here, I think creates good atmosphere for this sort of siren. We're setting, we have the opportunity to set the tone here, right? And and create the sort of situation that our characters are stepping into. We could certainly make the siren a Disney princess, and it's Ariel, and we love her, and she's amazing, and everything that she wants to do is a good thing. We could also make her a pure villain, but I think to get the full impact of this situation, we want a little mix of good and evil. We want to make this a complicated decision where the characters are really kind of struggling with what is right and wrong here. So, that missed idea and obscuring some of that helps set that tone, that this isn't a clear cut situation. This is a moment when the characters really need to make a choice without all the facts. That's a good idea. It's a really good idea. Fantasy Animal Vegan says, you know me, I love a good Disney Sea Witch. You know what? There's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that, depending on the story you're trying to tell. One of the cool things about Disney is they do a really good job of this is good and this is evil, and they make that very clear cut. And so it's gives a very distinct direction for their protagonists to follow, which is really useful when you're running a D&D campaign, and you want your characters to follow a particular sort of route or a particular sort of path without railroading them. You can make it very distinct that this is good, this is evil, and 99% of the time they're going to pick the side of good. Ben Elder says, rise from the water in a myriad of colors, only some of which you recognize as you enter the shallows. Following the noise, your feet begin to crunch on, not on the sand, but the bones of both animals and, I assume, humans. And as you enter the shallows, following the noise, If you enter into the sand and the bones of both animals and humanoids. Yep. Finally, the skull of a Leviathan, I'm sorry. Creature looms out through the mist. That's a really cool idea. I like that. I like that a lot. Let's capture that. So let's say, um, as the characters reach the atoll, they step onto the Coraline shore. Their boots crunch as they trod upon the eons of ancient coral and bones of the siren's victims. A prevailing mist obscures all view, forcing characters to advance into the unsettling unknown. Cool. Okay, that's a really cool idea. I like that a lot, Ben. Very cool. Let's see here. Fantasy Animal Vegan says, Ben, you have a lovely, haunting imagination. Can I buy a movie ticket to it? Yeah. Ben, you come up with some cool shit. I'm not gonna lie to you. That is a fantastic imagination, and I fully support it. Um, Ben Ellis says coral in blood red and bone white. Um, very a very cool description. That might be something to add here. So let's toss that in. Coral in blood red and bone white. And we'll clean this up as we go, but this is good stuff to capture. So there's some negotiation about the price of admission into Ben Helder's mind. And then Fantasy Alien says, you know what's really scary? A siren who's mentally controlling a pack of Karens. Now that's scary. Well, we did talk at one point about that the siren's daughters are scattered around the world, and so we can certainly make them Karens. We can have them ask for the manager, we can have them complain all that we want, and that's another sort of lever that the characters can work with here. Mr. Max says, undead giant hermit crab or something blending in with the environment, either a combat encounter or just to show something is definitely wrong with the island. Ooh, undead giant hermit crab. See, one of the things I don't necessarily want to do is I want to make this combat encounter at the beginning, right? Because that's kind of leaning into sort of our 5-room dungeon sort of methodology or 5-scene dungeon methodology. And while that is perfectly suitable for this, there's nothing wrong with building this encounter using that structure. One of the things we're doing in the stream is kind of breaking from that and showing different methodologies, different ways to approach storytelling. And so in this particular instance, I would want to stay away from a combat counter upon arrival, but that doesn't mean that we can't kind of set the scene with an undead giant hermit crab kind of trundling on the beach. You know, Mr. Max in particular will kind of recognize this story, but one of the things that I've done in, for example, the Tomb of Annihilation campaigns that I've run is when characters are camping out, I've talked about the sounds that they hear in the night, sort of the things that that give them pause, like a roar of a dinosaur that gets closer and moves away. Um, all of those sorts of things do a really great job of kind of setting the scene. So Mr. Mike says, can have her trying to help the sea life to show there is a hint of good. So they are thrown off about her. Yeah, it's potentially. You can really, so that's a really good question. You can determine how a party is going to feel about an NPC based on how you introduce them. If they're doing a kind thing when you introduce them, they're gonna your party almost invariably is gonna think well of them. If they're doing a cruel thing when you introduce them, your party is almost invariably gonna think poorly of them. And so it's that first impression that really matters. So if you want to set up the siren to be kind of a sort of compassionate character, introduce them doing a good thing. Introduce them trying to help the sea life and show their kindness. If you're trying to set them up as perhaps a vile sort of creature that maybe the party doesn't want to deal with, have them do something evil. Have them feasting on the body of another adventurer that's shown up here, that kind of thing. Um, that's really going to set the tone. One of the things that reading, PI fiction that takes place in the 1920s has really taught me is that uh, you introduce a character with the impression that they give the protagonists. And that really sets up that character for uh, what sort of experience the player's going to have with them, what sort of experience the protagonist is going to have with them. And because you introduce them in a certain way, that creates sort of a fundamental sort of moral compass for this character. And you can play with that. You can have them do nice things. You can have them do negative things, but your reader in this case, and in this case, sort of your players are never gonna forget that baseline that you created, and it's gonna either make them suspicious or it's gonna confirm their assumptions about this character. All good things. So Ben Elder says, sorry, the character limit on comments sucks. Yeah. Ben Elder, Mr. Rex says Ben is secretly Stephen King. Yeah, I can see that. Do you live in Maine? I know you live in the UK, but is that also possibly Maine? Mr. Max says the crab could just walk away, disturbing the party's arrival or something. 100%. You can use that as kind of set dressing. I think that's useful from time to time. Mr. Max says no assassin finds the beach. No finds. No, thank you. I'm sorry I scarred you all with assassin vines. Well, I'm not really sorry. I am. I'm glad that you all took the dangers of Chult seriously at that point. Uh, Fantasy Only Vegan says, "What if the hermit crab is switching shells? It would be a horrifying description. I think, yeah, that would be very, very cool, especially if it swaps to something like a giant skull as one of its shells. That could really kind of set the stage here for that kind of thing." Um, Ben Elder says maybe the undead crab is the size of a large dog. Maybe it pounces and devours a bright, happy-looking fish to set the tone before it scuttles away. 100% you could do it that kind of way. I would almost make it devour something that's more terrestrial than that, something that really is kind of, uh, you know, sort of more humanized. I would have it devour a mammal of some kind, like a rabbit, that kind of thing, uh, because your players are more likely to sort of um, emotionally commit to a mammal than they are to a fish. Um, it's just one of those weird things about people. They tend to connect with mammals more than they can tend to connect with other creatures. Um, let's see here. Ben Ellis says perhaps she throws fingers to a shark. Yeah, 100%. You can absolutely do that. She's feasting on a humanoid. She rips off a hand and kind of plucks off the fingers and tosses them to the shark. That's a great way to introduce her as a predatory sort of being. 100%. And then Fantasy Animal Vegan says, I just had the image of the siren as a sushi chef skillfully cutting up a human corpse and planting it delicately on beds of rice and seaweed. Oof, oof, 100% you could do that. That's a very visceral sort of image, and it would create a very certain sort of atmosphere. Uh, Really kind of suggesting the characters they want to work with the siren as a last resort. So you really could kind of set up the scene that way. And the Mr. Mech says, Crab climbs into a husk of a body, loose skin trailing it behind them as it leaves. Ooh, yeah, like it makes the rib cage its shell, and it's kind of lurching forward with this rotting body on top of it. That's a really interesting detail that again could really set the stage for this and really kind of set the atmosphere, and in doing so really make the character suspicious of the siren and not really wanting to trust her on her word, which might be really good for this encounter, especially since we're trying to make this a moral quandary, right? We want to give them lots of conflict involved in this. So, all fantastic ideas. So we are at our time, everybody. In fact, we're a little past our time for a Wednesday. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. You've come up with some incredible ideas. Um, Really some fantastic options for introducing the siren and really setting the stage for our player characters. All good stuff. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you have enjoyed this stream, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. All that stuff helps build out the channel and helps get more people in the chat, which keeps it very dynamic and very energetic. As you guys have done a really good job of doing. So before we sign off here today, we got a couple last comments. We've got Mr. Mech says, creepy stream. Ben, thanks for the nightmares. Fantasy Animal Vegan says he wants to watch cartoons with me after this so I can wash all of these horrifying images out of my head. That is, that's high praise, I think, for the Indian campaign when you can't get the mental images out. Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. We will see you all on Monday for our regularly scheduled stream. I look forward to chatting to you all then. And in the meantime, if you want to jump into one of my tables, please check me out at startplaying.games/GM/RJ Kerr. Those are my open tables at the moment. But again, there is that custom request button on there. So if you are not seeing an adventure that you want to play, if you want to play a homebrew adventure, if you're looking for a different time or setting, or if you're looking for a one-shot as opposed to a campaign, hit me up there, and I'm more than happy to work with you to figure out the best game for you. Again, thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you all on Monday. Talk to you then.